The day the FBI agent knocked on my Uncle Robert's door in his upscale Westchester County neighborhood was 15 years in the making. I wasn't there to see his face drain of color when they showed him the financial records I'd spent a decade piecing together, but I imagined it countless times. My mother died when I was 27, leaving behind her modest family home in rural Pennsylvania and a small inheritance that would have helped me finish graduate school. Instead, Uncle Robert, Mom's trusted brother and executor of her will, told me there was nothing left after medical bills. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was the successful investment banker in the family, the one who drove a BMW and sent his kids to private school while Mom and I scraped by. I left town heartbroken, not just from losing Mom, but from realizing how little she'd managed to save despite working 2 jobs most of her life. It wasn't until years later, when I accidentally discovered property records listing Uncle Robert as the new owner of Mom's house, that I realized what he'd done. This is the story of how I uncovered his web of lies, what I learned about my family's darkest secrets, and how justice finally caught up with the man who stole not just my inheritance, but my mother's legacy. Growing up in our small town in central Pennsylvania meant everyone knew everyone else's business, especially when it came to the Reynolds family. My mother, Sarah, raised me alone after my father took off when I was 3. She worked as a nurse at the county hospital during the day and waitressed at Denny's 3 nights a week. Uncle Robert was her only sibling, 7 years older and worlds apart in ambition and lifestyle. Even as a child, I noticed how differently Grandma and Grandpa treated them. When Robert visited from New York, it was like royalty had arrived. "There's our big success," Grandpa would beam, while Grandma fussed over his favorite meals. Mom would shrink a little each time, her contributions, raising me alone, working herself to exhaustion, never missing a school event, somehow less valuable than Robert's Wall Street achievements. "Family takes care of family," was my mother's mantra. She lived it too, taking in Grandma after Grandpa died, despite our tiny 3-bedroom house barely having space. Uncle Robert had a 5-bedroom colonial in Westchester, but claimed his wife Diane was allergic to elderly people. Mom never called him out on it. I remember my 16th birthday when Uncle Robert arrived unannounced with his picture-perfect family, Diane with her tennis club tan, and my cousins Madison and Tyler in their prep school uniforms. Mom had made my favorite lasagna and a homemade cake. "Sarah, honestly," Diane had said, eyeing our modest spread, "you could have at least ordered from that Italian place in Harrisburg if you were having guests." Mom apologized and Robert laughed. "Some people just don't have the knack for entertaining, Di." Later that night, I found Mom crying in the bathroom. When I asked what was wrong, she just hugged me and said, "Nothing, sweetheart, just tired." The dynamics shifted when Grandma got sick my senior year of high school, pancreatic cancer, terminal. Mom became her full-time caregiver while still working. Uncle Robert visited exactly twice in 8 months, both times spending more time on his phone than with his dying mother. After Grandma passed, we discovered she'd left her entire estate, about $180,000 from Grandpa's life insurance and their modest savings, to be split evenly between Mom and Uncle Robert. Mom planned to use her share to help me with college and maybe finally fix our leaking roof. The day the check arrived, Mom did something I'd never seen before. She drove us to the Olive Garden, our definition of fancy dining, and ordered a bottle of wine. "To new beginnings," she'd said, tears in her eyes. "Lauren, I can finally help you the way I've always wanted to." That night, she revealed her grand gesture. She was setting aside $40,000 specifically for my education. No loans, no working through school like she had to. "You'll be the first Reynolds to graduate college without debt," she said proudly. What none of us knew then was that Uncle Robert had been hiding a secret that would destroy everything. His investment firm had been under SEC investigation for months. His perfect Westchester life was built on fraudulent accounts and stolen client funds. But he'd kept up appearances, continuing to belittle Mom's life choices while his own house of cards was starting to sway. I often wonder if Mom somehow sensed what was coming, because she made Uncle Robert the executor of her will instead of her best friend Patty, like she'd originally planned. He knows about these things, she'd explained. And despite everything, he's family, blood. He'll make sure you're taken care of if anything happens to me. Those words would come back to haunt me in ways neither of us could have imagined. I was halfway through my master's program in social work at Penn State when Mom's migraines started. Just stress, she insisted, even as they became more frequent, more debilitating. By the time she finally saw a neurologist, the glioblastoma was already stage 4. 6 months, they gave her. She lasted 4. Uncle Robert made a grand show of stepping in during Mom's illness. He arranged for her to be treated at a top cancer center in Philadelphia, 2 hours from our home, where nobody could visit easily. He took a leave of absence from his firm, citing family emergency, though I later learned the SEC was closing in. He positioned himself as the family hero, the big brother swooping in to save the day. "Lauren, honey, you focus on your studies," he'd insisted when I wanted to drop out to care for Mom. "Sarah wants you to finish. I've got this covered." I believed him. God help me, I believed him. The last coherent conversation I had with Mom was about the inheritance. She was lucid that day, the steroids temporarily keeping the brain swelling at bay. "Remember the money we set aside for your education?" she'd asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't worry about that now, Mom," I'd replied. "No, listen, there's more. The house, it's paid off, no mortgage, and there's the life insurance, $50,000. It's all for you. Robert knows he'll handle everything." 2 weeks later, she was gone. The funeral was at Riverside Methodist, where Mom had sung in the choir for 20 years. Uncle Robert arranged everything: expensive casket, elaborate flower arrangements, catered reception at his hotel. I was too grief-stricken to question any of it. It was at the reception that the first red flag appeared. Patty, Mom's best friend since high school, cornered me by the bathrooms. "Lauren, has Robert discussed the will with you?" she asked, her voice low. "Not yet. There's been so much going on." Patty's face tightened. "Your mother showed me a copy last year. Make sure he shows you the original, and call me after, okay?" Before I could ask what she meant, Uncle Robert appeared, steering me away with a firm hand on my shoulder. "The minister wants to speak with you, Lauren." 3 days after the funeral, Uncle Robert invited me to dinner at the Hampton Inn where he was staying. He brought a leather portfolio and a somber expression. "I've been going through your mother's finances," he began, sliding some papers across the table. "I'm afraid it's not good news." According to Uncle Robert, Mom's cancer treatments had depleted everything. The experimental drugs not covered by insurance, the private room, the specialists, even remortgaging the house hadn't covered it all. "But the house was paid off," I said, remembering Mom's words. "She told me." Uncle Robert's expression was a perfect blend of pity and condescension. "Oh, Lauren, the cancer was affecting her brain. She was confused toward the end." "What about Grandma's money, the $40,000 for my education?" "Gone," he said simply. "Your mother used it for a treatment in Philadelphia. Didn't work, unfortunately." He slid another document across the table. "This is the bill from the hospital, still outstanding." The number made my stomach drop. $78,000. How can that be? She had insurance. "Catastrophic cap," he explained smoothly. "Look, I've negotiated with them. If we sell the house, it should cover most of it." I felt like I was drowning. But where will I live? I still have a year left in my program. Uncle Robert sighed heavily. "Lauren, I hate to be the one to say this, but you might need to consider taking a break from school. Get a job, save up. Your mother would understand." I stared at him, this man in his tailored suit with his Rolex watch and his perfect life, telling me to give up the dream my mother had sacrificed everything for. "Can I see the will?" I asked finally. Something flickered in his eyes. "Of course. It's being processed by my attorney in New York. I'll have him send you a copy." That copy never came. When I called his office the following week, his secretary informed me he was traveling on business. My follow-up emails went unanswered.
When I drove by my childhood home a month later, there was a "sold" sign in the yard. I tried calling Patty, but she'd gone on an extended cruise with her husband, a retirement gift she'd told everyone at the funeral.
I had no one to turn to, no way to prove what I suspected in my gut. Uncle Robert was stealing from me. The final straw came when I received an eviction notice. The house had been sold, and I had 30 days to vacate. When I frantically called the real estate company, they confirmed the new owner, Robert Reynolds. That night, I packed what I could fit in my old Honda Civic. I left behind furniture, photo albums, my mother's china, everything that wouldn't fit. As I pulled away from the only home I'd ever known, I made a vow. Someday, somehow, I would discover the truth, and Robert would pay for what he'd done. I had no idea then how complicated the truth would be, or how long the road to justice would take. For 5 years, I vanished, dropped out of Penn State, moved to Chicago, changed my phone number, and severed all ties with Pennsylvania. I worked 2 jobs, administrative assistant by day, bartender by night, and saved every penny I could. I also earned a paralegal certificate at night school, fueled by a newfound interest in estate law. Meanwhile, I began investigating. I hired a record search company to pull the deed transfer for my mother's house. It confirmed my suspicions. Uncle Robert had transferred the property to himself for the sum of $1. I obtained copies of Mom's medical bills through a former nursing colleague of hers. The total was nowhere near what Robert had claimed. I pulled Mom's credit report, discovering several loans taken out in her name after she became incapacitated, loans that required her signature. I was building a case piece by painstaking piece. The breakthrough came in my 6th year of exile. I received a Facebook message from Madison, my cousin. She was graduating college and wanted to reconnect. We met at a coffee shop in Chicago where she was interviewing for a job. "Dad doesn't know I'm contacting you," she confessed after awkward small talk. "He forbade us from mentioning your name after everything." "After what, exactly?" I asked. Madison looked uncomfortable. "After you tried to extort money from him, after you threatened to report him to his firm if he didn't give you more of Aunt Sarah's money." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Is that what he told you? Isn't it true?" Madison seemed genuinely confused. That conversation revealed the elaborate lie Robert had constructed. According to him, I'd been a greedy, unstable niece who demanded money I wasn't entitled to. He'd generously paid off Mom's considerable debts and given me several $1,000s to get back on my feet, money I'd squandered before demanding more. "Madison," I said carefully, "would you believe me if I told you that's completely false? That your father stole my inheritance and my home?" The doubt in her eyes was clear, but she listened. And then she did something unexpected. She gave me her father's private email password. "He uses the same one for everything," she explained. "I've seen things in his emails, things that don't add up. If what you're saying is true, maybe you'll find proof." The emails were a goldmine. Correspondence with his attorney about transferring the Pennsylvania property before anyone could make claims. Discussions about liquidating Sarah's assets quietly. And most damning of all, emails to a doctor in Philadelphia thanking him for the creative billing that would help with the estate situation. I took everything to an attorney who specialized in estate fraud. She confirmed what I already knew. I had a case, a strong one. But going after Robert meant going public with everything. The final piece fell into place when the SEC finally caught up with Robert. His firm was under federal investigation for securities fraud. I contacted the lead investigator, sharing what I'd discovered about Robert's personal financial dealings. They were very interested. 10 years after my mother's death, I returned to Pennsylvania for the Reynolds family reunion, an annual event I'd never expected to attend again. It was being held at Robert's vacation home in the Poconos, a sprawling lakeside retreat purchased, I now knew, the same year he'd stolen my inheritance. I arrived unannounced. The family was gathered on the deck overlooking the lake, Robert holding court, Diane by his side, various cousins, aunts, and uncles hanging on his every word. Madison saw me first, her eyes widening in recognition and something like relief. The conversation died as I approached. Robert's face went from confusion to recognition to barely concealed panic in seconds. "Lauren," he managed, "this is a surprise." "Hello, Uncle Robert," I said, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "I thought it was time for a family reunion." Diane stepped forward, her smile tight. "Lauren, this is a private gathering." "Yes, the Reynolds family gathering," I replied. "Last I checked, I'm still a Reynolds." Robert laughed nervously. "Of course you are. Everyone, look who's here. My niece, Lauren, all grown up." "All grown up and fully informed," I corrected him, "about everything." The confusion on the faces around us was palpable. "Maybe we should talk inside," Robert suggested quietly. "No," I said firmly. "I think everyone should hear this. How you stole my mother's house, how you pocketed her life insurance, how you forged her signature on loans after she was too sick to hold a pen, how you lied about medical bills to justify taking everything she left for me." The deck fell silent. Robert's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little," he began, but I cut him off. "I have copies of everything, Uncle Robert. The fraudulent deed transfer, the emails to your attorney, the correspondence with that doctor in Philadelphia about creative billing. The SEC has it all, too." At the mention of the SEC, Robert went pale. "You don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Don't I? Should we discuss the Madoff-style Ponzi scheme you've been running? The one that's about to collapse around you?" As if on cue, two men in suits appeared at the edge of the deck. They weren't FBI, not yet, but SEC enforcement officers with a subpoena. "Robert Reynolds?" one called out. The look on Robert's face, pure, unadulterated fear, was something I'll never forget. As the officers approached, I turned to the stunned family members. "He stole from me," I said clearly, "just like he's been stealing from his clients. From all of you, probably. Check your investments. Check anything he's ever managed for you." Before anyone could respond, I walked away, leaving chaos in my wake. As I reached my car, Madison caught up with me. "I knew something was wrong," she said breathlessly. "I just didn't know how bad it was." I looked at my cousin, the same age I'd been when I lost everything, and felt a sudden surge of compassion. "It's going to get worse," I told her gently. "You should prepare yourself." The aftermath was swift and devastating for Uncle Robert. The SEC investigation expanded, revealing a decade-long fraud scheme that had bilked clients, including several family members, out of millions. Federal charges followed. The media had a field day with headlines like "Mainline Financial Advisor's House of Cards Collapses" and "Family Fraud, How One Man Stole from Dead Sister's Daughter." I received a call from Aunt Diane 3 days after the reunion. She was simultaneously apologetic and accusatory. "You could have come to us privately," she hissed. "Did you have to destroy our family in public?" "The way Robert privately destroyed mine?" I countered. Her voice broke. "They've frozen all our accounts, the children's college funds, everything. Madison has to drop out of grad school. Is that what you wanted?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Madison facing exactly what I had faced. But unlike Robert, I couldn't bring myself to punish the innocent. "Check your email," I told her. "I've sent you information for a victim's advocate who specializes in financial fraud cases. They can help Madison apply for hardship exceptions and emergency financial aid." There was a long pause. "Why would you help us?" "Because I'm not Robert," I said simply, and hung up. The biggest surprise came from Patty, my mother's best friend. She contacted me through my attorney, insisting on a meeting. We met at a diner in our hometown, the place Mom and I used to have Sunday breakfast after church. "I've been waiting for this day," she said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Your mother knew something was wrong with Robert years ago. She never had proof, just suspicions based on things he'd say that didn't add up. When she got sick, she feared he might try something."
Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter from my mother, dated 2 weeks before her death, along with a copy of her actual will, notarized and witnessed by Patty and her husband. "She made me promise to keep this safe," Patty explained, "to give it to you if anything seemed wrong after she was gone. But then you disappeared, and by the time I got back from our cruise, there was no way to reach you." With shaking hands, I read my mother's final words. "My dearest Lauren, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and something has happened with Robert. I pray I'm wrong about my suspicions, but I've seen how he looks at what little I have with calculating eyes."
The official will he has is real, but this letter serves as a codicil. Everything I have goes to you. The house on Maple Street, my life insurance policy, JT421968, and the special account at First National, account 82-553-9821, where I've set aside money for your education. Robert is named as executor in the official will because I didn't want to arouse his suspicions. But you should know the truth. I don't trust him. I haven't for years. There's $78,000 in that account, Lauren, enough to finish school and start your life without the burdens I carried. If Robert has done right by you, then burn this letter and never speak of my doubts. But if my fears were justified, use this to fight for what's yours. I love you more than life itself. Mom." She withdrew the money from her joint account with Robert and opened a new one in her name only, Patty explained. Robert never knew about it. "But I never received any money from that account," I said. Patty's expression darkened. "Because Robert closed it 3 days after she died. He had her death certificate and claimed he was the executor. The bank never verified with the actual will." This was the smoking gun, proof of deliberate theft, not just manipulation of an ambiguous situation. My attorney filed additional charges against Robert, now including bank fraud and embezzlement. The next year unfolded like a fever dream. I testified before a grand jury. Robert was indicted on multiple federal charges. Former clients came forward with similar stories of missing funds and falsified statements. The FBI investigation revealed offshore accounts, shell companies, and a pattern of fraud dating back 15 years. Through it all, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I returned to school, completing my master's in social work with a focus on helping victims of financial abuse. I reconnected with Madison and Tyler, who were struggling to reconcile the father they knew with the criminal the world now saw. "How did you survive it?" Madison asked me once. "Losing everything, starting over." "I found something stronger than money," I told her, "self-reliance, the knowledge that I could lose everything and still stand." The most unexpected relationship developed with Diane. After the initial shock and denial, she filed for divorce and reached out to me for guidance navigating the legal system. The woman who had once looked down on my mother's modest home now sat at my tiny apartment kitchen table, learning how to create a budget for the first time in her adult life. "I was so awful to your mother," she admitted one evening, "so condescending, and all the while she was the one with integrity, while I was married to a fraud." "Mom would have forgiven you," I told her truthfully. She believed in second chances. As for the house on Maple Street, my childhood home, it had been sold to a young family before the asset freeze hit. The court ruled that while the sale was fraudulent, the new owners had purchased in good faith and couldn't be penalized. Instead, the court ordered that I be compensated from Robert's assets at current market value, 3 times what it had been worth when he sold it. The most profound moment came during Robert's sentencing hearing. I had the right to deliver a victim impact statement and spent weeks drafting and redrafting what I wanted to say. In the end, I stood before the court and looked directly at the hollow shell of the man who had once seemed so powerful. "I don't speak today seeking vengeance," I began. "I speak for my mother, who believed until her dying day that family takes care of family. Uncle Robert, you betrayed that principle in the most fundamental way. But in doing so, you taught me something valuable, that family isn't just about blood, it's about actions, integrity, and love." I paused, watching him shrink further into himself. "I lost my inheritance, but I found my strength. I lost my home, but I built a new one. I lost my trust in you, but I found it in myself. For that unexpected gift, I thank you." Robert Reynolds was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The judge ordered restitution to all victims, though the forensic accountants warned we might recover only cents on the dollar. The unexpected twist came 6 months later. A registered letter arrived from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a deed to a property in my name, a small cabin in the Pocono Mountains. Per our client's instructions, the cover letter read, "This property is transferred to you as partial restitution." The client was Diane. She had received the cabin in her divorce settlement and chose to sign it over to me. "Mom would have forgiven you," I told her truthfully. She believed in second chances. As for the house on Maple Street, my childhood home, it had been sold to a young family before the asset freeze hit. The court ruled that while the sale was fraudulent, the new owners had purchased in good faith and couldn't be penalized. Instead, the court ordered that I be compensated from Robert's assets at current market value, 3 times what it had been worth when he sold it. The most profound moment came during Robert's sentencing hearing. I had the right to deliver a victim impact statement and spent weeks drafting and redrafting what I wanted to say. In the end, I stood before the court and looked directly at the hollow shell of the man who had once seemed so powerful. "I don't speak today seeking vengeance," I began. "I speak for my mother, who believed until her dying day that family takes care of family. Uncle Robert, you betrayed that principle in the most fundamental way. But in doing so, you taught me something valuable, that family isn't just about blood. It's about actions, integrity, and love." I paused, watching him shrink further into himself. "I lost my inheritance, but I found my strength. I lost my home, but I built a new one. I lost my trust in you, but I found it in myself. For that unexpected gift, I thank you." Robert Reynolds was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The judge ordered restitution to all victims, though the forensic accountants warned we might recover only cents on the dollar. The unexpected twist came 6 months later. A registered letter arrived from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a deed to a property in my name, a small cabin in the Pocono Mountains. Per our client's instructions, the cover letter read, "This property is transferred to you as partial restitution." The client was Diane. She had received the cabin in her divorce settlement and chosen to sign it over to me. "It's not your childhood home," she wrote in an accompanying note, "but perhaps it can be a place where you create new memories, where healing can begin." I stood on the porch of that cabin, overlooking a small, peaceful lake, and felt something I hadn't experienced in 15 years, a sense of home. Not the same home I'd lost, but something new, something mine. And in that moment, I finally understood what my mother had meant about family taking care of family. Sometimes, family is what you make it. 15 years after my uncle stole my inheritance, justice has been served, though not in the way I once imagined. Robert will spend a decade behind bars, not just for what he did to me, but for the countless others he defrauded. The money he stole from my mother helped fund the lifestyle that kept his Ponzi scheme looking legitimate. In the end, his house of cards collapsed under the weight of its own lies. Today, I run a nonprofit organization helping victims of financial fraud navigate the complicated path to recovery. Madison works alongside me, using her finance degree to untangle the deliberate confusion predators like her father create. We've helped hundreds of families reclaim not just their assets, but their dignity. The cabin Diane gave me has become a retreat center where we host weekend workshops for survivors. My mother's spirit lives on in this work, her belief that family takes care of family, even when that family is forged in shared experience rather than blood. If there's one thing I've learned through this journey, it's that justice rarely looks the way we expect it to. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it comes from unexpected allies. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't in what we recover, but in who we become along the way. If you've experienced financial betrayal by someone you trusted, know that you're not alone. Your story matters. Your recovery is possible. Like this video, subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience and practical advice on rebuilding after fraud. Remember, your worth isn't measured by what was taken from you, but by how you rise again.